Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Orphanlast, aka Skylar Madison, and welcome to another episode in the presentation series. This is what I've done so far with the animation process. This is the progress I've made from start to finish so far. I feel as though I'm about halfway done. Notice I've added in this demonstration a new icon to each window on the screen. It's just this little down arrow. Now, I don't imagine that this icon will necessarily be needed for every single window, such as the viewer, combo viewer, toolbar, tool options bar, the command bar, and other windows that are pretty much mandatory on the screen in order to work Opentoonz. Like, you have the option to have them or not, but really they're already at their optimum size and configuration. But for the overwhelming majority, I think that this icon should be added to as many windows as possible. When this little downward arrow icon is clicked, it'll collapse the window into a free-floating icon. Here, I click on the down arrow, and you can see that it collapsed the entire window into a free-floating icon. This free-floating icon can be placed anywhere on the screen that you'd like by clicking and dragging on this little gripper visual aid I put here. Little grippers like this are often found on mobile applications, so as I see it, people already know that this is a visual cue. That means that you can go ahead and click and drag on it in some way or another. You open the window back to full size by clicking on the main body of the icon. Notice how the free-floating icon disappeared after opening it to full size. Also notice how the window opened to full size and it snapped into its last known location and its last known configuration in relationship to all the other windows that are snapped on the screen at full size. Now, I collapse the window again by clicking on the downward arrow, and we can see that the free-floating icon appears in the last known location that I placed it. This allows you to customize where the icon for collapsed windows will be placed on the interface if you want to use a free-floating icon. Also, notice how on the free-floating icon there's a red X to indicate that you can close the window and get rid of the icon as well. This X indicator will only be available for free-floating icons that have not been snapped to the interface. However, if you want the icon to be smaller, you can snap it. Pretty cool, huh? I mean, it's starting to come together. It's starting to make sense at this point. And the thing about this video is it's a lot of it is just basically the same sort of commentary, the same sort of voiceover that I would be providing about the previous tutorial. The only thing that I would like to add is that I actually don't think that the hook tool was necessarily needed for the last video. Actually, just parenting and using the exact same workflow that I used earlier is pretty much all that's needed. Now here on the screen what you're seeing is me using the Xsheet tab. I don't use this very often, but just seeing a really big Xsheet oftentimes allows me to see exactly what's going on a lot better than I can on a horizontal timeline, just simply because the width of each column is just easier to track as you're scrolling through everything. Now, what I was doing was I was just getting rid of all of the extra keyframes, and then I was just grabbing the last keyframe. That's the most important one because that's where the last scene left off. And I just go ahead and proceed from there. Just move the last keyframe up to the very top of the Xsheet, the beginning of the entire animation. So at this point, I've already gotten rid of the old audio and put in the new audio that has the timing that I need, and I've gone ahead and exposed all of the frames for the full extent of the animation and listened very carefully for what it is that I need for the project. What is exposed at this point in time, and how does everything need to move around? How is everything needing to be situated? And that's all that I'm really doing. I'm listening really carefully. Before I even start the video, I've already looked at what page of the storyboard I'm working on. But more than that, it's not just the storyboard. Listening carefully to the audio cues is really important because there's a few last-minute decisions that I make that's not in the storyboard that really help out quite a bit, such as the mouse, the cursor. It winds up being used in my animation here as if it were something kind of like, let's say, a magician's assistant. Usually it's a beautiful woman and such like that. And she's usually used to point at things and to guide the eye towards specific directions. The only difference from how I'm using this particular technique is I'm not using the cursor, in this case, as a means of misdirection. I'm using it as a means to direct and to get you to see what it is that I'm describing. Now, if you just saw a few seconds ago on the screen, I enlarged the size of the free-floating icon, and then I decided to actually open up the prior scene, because something happened with the new scene when I went save as. Sometimes this happens. This is some weird glitch that sometimes occurs, where you go File, Save Scene As, and something gets resized for some reason. Now, what I realized in this process is I wanted to get the scaling on the function editor in the prior scene, and I didn't know if that information could be copied and then I could open up the scene that I'm currently working on and paste the scaling information in. So what I did is I opened up a notepad and just typed it in just in case. But actually, that notepad wasn't even necessary. I just went to the prior scene, copied the scale information, opened up the scene that I was currently working on, and then pasted the scaling values right in, and I was able to proceed from there. And I really needed the scale of the free-floating icon to be the same, because throughout the entire animation, I don't want the free-floating icon to just kind of bloop, get real small, and bloop, get real big, and bloop, get slightly smaller, and bloop, get way bigger. That would get really annoying. Okay, so just a few seconds ago, you actually saw me render that page of the storyboard, and then I went into Filmora, my editing software, and then place that into the final version of the editing process so that I can just proceed from there. Now, I had a few false starts while starting on the next page of the storyboard. What wound up happening was, in the prior scene that I just barely worked on inside of this video, I decided to collapse the Xsheet into the wrong area. If you move the free-floating icon around the interface, the idea is that when you collapse the free-floating icon, it's going to collapse to the last place that you put it. And instead, I put it right there, right where the white arrow is, the upper left-hand side of the Xsheet. And that didn't work. So I had to go back to the previous scene and kind of rework it just a little bit and re-render it. But for some reason it didn't render it with the new updated information, and I think it's because I didn't save the scene with the new changes, which is kind of weird to kind of think of. Why would saving it make some sort of difference? I don't know if that's the case, but I wound up having to open up the prior scene that I worked on inside of this video and change it to the way that it needed to be again, and re-rendered it a third time, and the third time was the charm, and then I threw it into Filmora again, and then proceeded onward from there. Now, I actually did 3 pages of the storyboard this week, so that's a little bit of a record. I mean, it's not a whole hell of a lot of work, but with the subscriber drawing request series, it did take a lot of time. Now, what's happening on the screen right now is one of those false starts, so I have a little bit of time to actually talk about something else. The next animation video is going to be one of the 51 animation challenges for next week, so the presentation series for next week will just have to go to the wayside just for a week, just simply because I need to be in the practice of animating on a regular basis. The whole workflow of it all, it needs to be fresh in my mind at all times, otherwise I get rusty. And although this does qualify as being animation, me working with this presentation series, it's not the same type of animation. It's not the same sort of creativity that's going on. The only thing that this is really getting me familiar with is being able to interact with the Xsheet and the timeline in a more elaborate sort of way. That's all that the presentation series is doing for me. However, it does offer a couple of other things that can be a little bit frustrating, such as organizing a bunch of different files and being able to remember where they are at all times and being able to keep things organized for an entire project. So that, I guess, it has been pretty educational. I guess I'm a little bit more equipped on how to make a full-blown cartoon, in the sense that I know how to organize things a little bit better for that, but even still, it's not the same sort of creativity, and that's what I'm getting at. And so since I am still learning how to animate, I need to be really well practiced as much as possible. So I will be going back to the 51 animation challenge next week. The week after that, I'll be going back into working on this. So yeah, it's just the same process. I put in the new audio, I go ahead and adjust everything, expose all of the frames that I need throughout the full animation. I really didn't have any need for the hooked level that I was using in the prior video, but I'm keeping it around because I know there's going to come a point to where I am going to need it. Now, every once in a while, you're going to see me open up Filmora and then render something. That's me grabbing the timing, the storyboard timing that I created earlier, and then rendering it as an audio file. And I find that the audio file is more useful to me than having an entire level dedicated to just being one page of a storyboard. I could just look at the storyboard and just go from there. Now, if there's one thing that I need to stress here, even though I've mentioned this just a little while ago, the main star of the entire animation really is the cursor. Getting it to move around and communicate to the audience. Get the cursor to point at things, because that's what it is. It's an arrow. It's pointing at things. And here you saw me pull out the snipping tool. I took a picture of the window menu because I wind up closing the FreeFloating Icon, and then I just go ahead and grab that visual from the snipping tool and place it right where it needs to be and make it look as though the cursor clicks at the Windows menu and then clicks on the Xsheet, and then the FreeFloating Icon reappears. So that's something that I find interesting, where you could be able to have an entire window open directly as just a free-floating icon, instead of it just opening up as a gigantic window immediately. Now, I'm sure this would be contextual, where if you closed the full-sized Xsheet, then when you go to the Windows menu, it would wind up opening it as a full-sized Xsheet. Whereas if you closed it as a free-floating icon, it would open as a free-floating icon. Now, it is pretty daunting to work on this every single week, just simply because there's so many different files, but as I've continued to work on it and everything, the files have become more and more familiar to me and all that. And actually, when I was able to actually set aside the time to work on this, it was actually pretty fun. So let me go ahead and show you how I've organized the files for this production. Not that I actually consider myself anywhere close to being finished. I'm about halfway through. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you these files, okay? So, first of all, inside of my pictures file, or folder, this is where I store all of my pictures and such like that. Okay, so you can see that there's this Collapsible Windows presentation. Now, I click on this, and there's, if you recall, I had a false start at making this entire series. And so this is where pretty much a lot of different concept images are, just kind of pre-production ideas, and some attempts at making the production series from the first attempt that ultimately failed. Now, inside of this assets folder, I don't even know why this is even wound up here, but this is where the user interface wound up going and everything like that. And I have a modified folder for things such as the cursor, the modified level strip. Let me go ahead and open that. Basically, it's the only difference with this is this little white arrow at the top. Same thing with all of these that are modified. There's not really much that's modified with the user interface. So back to the rest of this, you know, I got my snapped icon. So if I open up this, the color model snapped, for example, that's something that I want to have collapsible, because having a color model is actually extremely useful. And I Yeah, you know what, that makes sense as the icon for the color model. However, since I can't edit this in Krita as an SVG, I mean, export it as an SVG, but since I can't import it back into Opentoonz as an SVG, I can't resize this to be the proper size. For example, it's supposed to be about this size as soon as it loads. See, it's supposed to be about this big. Now, this is going to be the function editor icon. Now, because if you think about it, when you're working with the Xsheet, you're kind of working with film. So the icon for the Xsheet is going to be just a strip of film, whereas the function editor is going to have a gear associated with it. You're modifying what's on the Xsheet. So that totally makes sense to me, at least. Now, some of these icons may need adjustment. If you guys want to give me feedback, I guess you can go ahead and do that, but it's all kind of up in the air. So that pretty much kind of covers this here. You know, there's the unsnapped like things that I've made here. So I keep going back to this whenever I need to have an asset applied to the Xsheet and such like that. That's artistic that I've personally had to make. So that's something there. Now, as for the videos, now I have another Collapsible Windows folder inside of my videos folder. I go into here, and, you know, I have my storyboard here, I have the audio file, I have the Audacity audio file, the actual MP3, I have the script, I have a few graphics that I need. For some reason they're in here and not inside of the pictures folder, but that's just the way it wound up being. Opentoonz Collapsible Windows presentation. I don't know what this is, to be honest. As soon as I'm done, like, I doubt I'm even going to use that. I don't want to delete anything just simply because I might need it later. And then there's the Opentoonz render collapsible windows. Now, these are the things that I've rendered directly from Opentoonz. These are the finished animations. And what happens here is I go ahead and click and drag these into my editing software here, and once I'm done, I just click and drag it into here, extract, make sure that the audio is at least close to the audio that, like the master audio and everything. Ultimately, I wind up getting rid of the audio that's linked to the actual video footage, but just as long as it's matching close enough to what's going on inside of master audio and everything, I'm happy. So there's not going to be any problem with that. And then the timing. Now, the timing is just a little... the first time I used Opentoonz for this entire project, okay? So I finished with making the storyboard, and then inside of this series, I used Opentoonz for the very first time. This is what I was making, little snippets that had just one image from the storyboard and some audio. And so I created these, and that helps me. Right when I start making one of these videos, I wind up opening this up, and I listen to the audio, and I look at the image, and I read what needs to be done and everything, and I proceed from there. And I find that to be extremely useful. See, I see that the Xsheet gets collapsed here, and then I go up here and click Basic. That's really all that I can really gather from this. But anyways, so... but a lot of it is also just listening to the audio, like I mentioned earlier in the video. Just listen to the audio a lot, look at what's on the storyboard, and that is a good guide and all that. So, and these right here, the ones that have these cones, these are the actual MP3s. So I wind up opening these video files, watch it, listen to it, and then I go into Filmora, click and drag it into here, and then click export, and then click MP3, and then export it. Splatter! Well, that pretty much concludes it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like it, please like, share, and subscribe anyways. There's a lot of work that goes into making these videos. And if you'd like to take a look at any of my other videos, feel free to click on any of them that are appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.